One of the questions I get asked the most is, what is the best airgun in the world? And I generally tend to answer that question with another question, the best at what? Because the answer is not as straightforward as you might think. Airguns come in all kinds of shapes and forms nowadays, and there are some that are very purpose-built for specific tasks, making them better suited to that task than anything else on the market. It's no secret that the FX Impact is probably my favorite airgun, but it doesn't mean it's the first gun that I would grab if I wanted to do something very specific, like, for example, shoot a precision rifle match. It is a versatile gun. It is a great hunting gun that fits my needs for that particular purpose, but it's not the best at everything. In today's video, we're going to run through different shooting disciplines, from hunting to various forms of competition shooting, and we're going to discuss all the considerations that need to be made for each style of shooting to try and narrow down your options and to help you find the right choice for your particular needs. Let's get straight to it. I am organized for this video. We've made a proper table over here, and we're going to be splitting up different shooting disciplines into two main headings, hunting and sport/competition shooting, and we're going to be breaking those down into four subheadings. So under hunting, we've got walk and stalk, which is more sort of walking around, carrying the gun in your hands, possibly with a sling over your shoulder, and then shooting, generally speaking, at slightly closer distances. So form factor and weight's going to be important. And then we've got stationary/long range shooting, so shooting off a tripod or shooting prone at a target that's probably going to be fairly far away. We've got, under sport/competition, we've got bench rest, and we've got precision rifle. Now there are other sport shooting disciplines, obviously. An obvious one would be field target, but I'm going to stick to the things that I have experience in. No one wants to hear me talk about stuff that I don't really know about, so we'll just stick to those two. And at the end, once we've run through all the considerations, little bits and pieces you need to know for each of those disciplines, we will give some recommendations of guns that I've used that I feel fit those sort of molds really well. Let's start off by running through the first sort of consideration point here, and that is configuration. What I mean by configuration, you can call it form factor, you can call it size and shape, but it's the way that everything is built around the main block or action. The heart of a PCP airgun is the block or action, where the hammer and valve are located, where your breech block is, and there's multiple ways to do this. On a more traditional sort of rifle shape, you've got your action over here, you load it here, you seat your pellet or slug in here, and directly below that you've got your trigger group. And generally speaking, with a normal traditional rifle, you've got a buttstock at the rear, and your length is fairly long because your barrel only starts sort of halfway up the gun. So these are great for a number of things, but they also have weaknesses, and one of the main weaknesses is normally the length and the need to have shorter barrels to make it more compact, and that's where a bullpup comes in. A bullpup, like this Impact M3 here, has the trigger in the front here where it normally would be, but your barrel actually starts all the way back. So your action here, your magazine and where your slug gets seated into the barrel, happens all the way back here. And what that allows you to do is to use a longer barrel without the overall length of the gun becoming too long. And that's a huge benefit, particularly if you want more power, because airguns with the low working pressures that we have require long runways to get a pellet or slug up to speed. So it has its benefits, but obviously it's got its weaknesses as well. One of those is normally that the forend here isn't the best place to mount accessories like bipods, for example, and you often have less adjustability at the back with length of pull and cheek piece height and all of that. But we're here to talk about the different disciplines. So let's start off with walk and stalk hunting. I've put bullpup or rifle here because I would say that this depends on where you are and what your laws are, and what sort of species you want to hunt. If you are in the UK, for example, you're limited to 12 foot-pounds of muzzle energy and you're shooting pigeons in the shed. You're not going to need a gun with a very long barrel or a massive air capacity. You're going to be shooting sort of 20 to 40 meters, and you can easily get away with a more traditional rifle with a cylinder, a wooden or synthetic stock, and a nice sling over your shoulders that makes it easy to carry around. And that would be my recommendation for that. It's easy to say that a bullpup is better, or a complicated gun in a chassis is better, but the reality is you don't really need that, and it may actually be worse for what you're trying to do. However, if you are like me and you want to shoot with a relatively high power to hit animals at a distance that may be harder to put down. You know, in South Africa, we've got a bit more open space, so distance is often a thing, even if you walk and stalk shooting. Then I tend to lean towards a bullpup like the Impact because I can put a longer barrel on it. So this is a 600mm barrel, which is quite a standard length for a rifle shape, but I'm able to shoot like a 30 grain slug at really good speed, really good power, and still keep it nice and short. So for walk and stalk through the bush where I might need to quickly shoulder and shoot, this is a fantastic option. It's small, but I get the power out of it. So walk and stalk, you're going to want to consider the kind of power output and what you're trying to put down. And then stationary / long range shooting, I've gone and said once again bullpup or rifle, and for similar reasons. They both have strengths and weaknesses. I would almost lean towards a rifle for this, mainly because on a rifle, generally speaking, if you want to shoot prone, or if you want to shoot off a tripod, for example, then rifles generally are better to mount a bipod on and to have a good rear stock to put a bag underneath, and you're going to get a little bit more stability when shooting prone. And then you can also balance the gun on a bag, on a tripod, or lock it into a tripod arc rail if you have a chassis. And those are massive benefits to getting stable when shooting at longer distances. However, back to my original point about barrel length. I often end up hunting at long range with a bullpup with an 800mm barrel, because that extra runway allows me to shoot heavier slugs which have a better ballistic coefficient, and that performs better at long range in the wind and gives me a better success rate. Obviously, the form factor is not the best for, like, let's say locking on a tripod, but I've managed to get around that by mounting an arc rail over here, and I can still lock it into a tripod if I need it. So I would lean towards recommending a rifle for that, but a bullpup can work if you really need the power out of it. Moving on to the sports shooting side. This might sound like a contradiction because I've often used bullpups in the past for this, but I'm going to recommend a rifle for both bench rest and precision rifle. And here is my reasoning behind that. For bench rest, okay, you get different disciplines of bench rest, which we'll get to possibly a little bit later. But for bench rest, generally speaking, you need a really solid front rest, often in the form of a rest that your fore end actually clamps into, or a bipod. And then in the rear, you need a good bag. And a rifle shape with a longer barrel and a longer stock generally fits that mold much better. A bullpup is kind of overcomplicating it, especially when it comes to trying to fit a bipod or rest in the front. You have to clamp it on a bottle or move your bipod further back. It's not the ideal setup. The only reason I've gone and used an Impact for bench rest in the past is because it's a gun that I'm very familiar with. So I can fly to the US, set it up, a new gun up there in one day, and still be comfortable behind it. Whereas if I was trying to set up a brand new bench rest gun and having to customize it to get the bipod mounted and all that, I'd be a little bit less comfortable. So rifle is my recommendation. Precision rifle, this isn't even a question. A bullpup is not ideal for this. The first problem is balance. It's very hard to get a bullpup like this to balance properly because it's so back heavy. But secondly, for the same reasons, a rifle like this is my competition rig, You can see I've got all these internal weights in here, and then I've got the external weights in the front. It's just the form factor is so much better. It's low profile, which you struggle to get out of a bullpup, which means I can fit through small gaps in barricades much better. And it's actually a non-negotiable thing. If you try to rock up to a PRS 22 or NRL 22 competition with an impact, you might do okay, but you're going to struggle to fit through certain props, and you're not going to be able to get the same balance and performance that you would out of a gun like this DRS Pro in an MDT chassis. This is my competition rig, and it is so good at what it does that for this discipline, even though I consider the Impact my all-time favorite PCP, this one 100% takes the cake for what we're doing there. Okay, moving on to the next category, which is the Regulator. Do you need a regulated airgun? There was a time, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, when this was actually a debate. Nowadays, it's not really much of a debate. A regulator is quite important, especially with the distances we're pushing now. If you don't have a regulator in your airgun, that is something that makes your working pressure consistent from when you fill the gun to when the main tank is empty. You're just simply not going to be able to achieve the velocity consistency that you need to actually perform at those high levels, whether it's hunting or competition shooting. So walk and stalk, I've said recommended because if you're shooting at close distances, that velocity spread is not as big as a problem than if you're shooting at longer distances or competing at a very high level in competition where that precision matters. Walk and stalk shooting, I would say still get a gun that's regulated. You get very unaffordable air guns now that are regulated, but if, let's say, you have an old Air Arms S410 or an old, I don't know, I don't even remember, Benjamin Marauder that's unregulated, you're still probably going to be okay. Stationary / long range, I've said a regulator is non-negotiable. Very simple, you need that velocity consistency for performance at long range. Don't even bother with the gun that's not regulated. And then on the sports side for bench rest, once again, regulator, non-negotiable. You can't have your point of impact shifting even a millimeter or two up and down at a bench rest competition. Velocity consistency is key to winning those competitions. And precision rifle, once again, non-negotiable, cut and dry, let's move on. Oh, there's one caveat here, and this is an interesting one. This is a dedicated bench rest gun. This is a PTE custom bench rest gun made in the Netherlands for their unlimited class bench rest, which is 100 meters, no power restrictions. It shoots like 115 foot-pounds in 22 cal. Actually have to detune it to not shoot a 40 grain slug at supersonic speeds. And this is unregulated, but because the rules in unlimited class bench rest allow for your gun to be tethered to a tank, you actually have an external regulator between your air tank and your gun that you can set while you're shooting with a big knob. So technically it is actually regulated, and that's why I'm still sticking with my point of saying it's non-negotiable to be regulated. But yeah, I just thought that's interesting that this gun doesn't have a built-in regulator. All right, moving on to the next point, air supply. How does your PCP airgun store air, and how much air capacity do you need? Note that I'm not saying how many shots do you need, because once again, we have powers ranging from like under 10 foot-pounds of muzzle energy to over 100 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. The air consumption is totally different in different regions and different power restrictions. So I'm more talking about your air supply on the gun that you're choosing to achieve the shot count you need for that discipline. So walk and stalk hunting, I would say you'd be fine to go with a cylinder or a small bottle, even if you're shooting at high power. So what I'm saying with that is shot count is less important. Why? Because walk and stalk hunting, I mean, how many people go walk and stalk hunting and shoot 1,000 ground squirrels in a day? It's not really the norm. There are cases when that happens, but it doesn't happen often. And I would say if you have a cylinder or a small bottle, your primary concern is how the gun carries on your shoulder when you're walking around and how lightweight it is. You'll be totally fine getting away with sort of maybe 15 shots per fill at high power or 80 to 100 shots per fill at very low power. you're going to be totally fine with that. Stationary slash long range, because weight is not such a big factor if you have your gun on a tripod or shooting prone, I would say you're going to be fine with a cylinder, but a large bottle will also be a great thing to have, because that extra shot count and extra weight is possibly even a good thing. The reason I even put cylinder in there is because sometimes the form factor of a gun with a cylinder just tends to be better suited to long range shooting, and that has nothing to do with the fact that it's a bottle or a cylinder, but it's got to do with the shape of a cylinder being better suited to a shape of chassis like this that works better for long range shooting. So I hope that makes sense. Bench rest. This completely depends on the rules of the type of bench rest shooting that you're doing. I mentioned unlimited class bench rest, you can tether to a tank. So whether you're shooting with a cylinder on your gun or a bottle doesn't matter, but generally speaking, a cylinder is actually going to be better for that, because once again, that stock that molds around that cylinder is going to sit better in the forend of a rest for bench rest shooting if you are shooting unlimited class and you're tethered. If you're not shooting unlimited class, you have to keep your air separate to your gun and you're not allowed to have it tethered, in which case a bigger air capacity is hugely desirable, because it means that you don't have to interrupt your scorecard if you're on a roll getting lots of X's. You don't have to interrupt it to refill. So I prefer, for the sort of 100-yard bench rest in the US, I prefer to have a larger bottle. It's one of the reasons I was happy shooting an impact for bench rest. But if you're shooting 25-meter bench rest where your air consumption is very low at low power, or if you're shooting unlimited class where you're tethered, a cylinder will be perfectly fine. Precision rifle. A cylinder is fine for precision rifle. Even though you're pushing the power really high, you only need 10 to 15 shots max for a stage, and you're going to refill that cylinder between each stage anyway. So you don't need that many shots per fill, and a cylinder like this one, the DRS, this is a nice carbon cylinder here that can be filled to like 270 bars, something like that. It's a great fit for this gun. Don't need any more, and yeah, just doesn't get in the way like a bottle would for this discipline. This next point is quite important, and that is whether to choose a gun with a stock like this one here, or a chassis like this one here, or nothing in the case of the impact. And once again, a lot of this comes down to the purpose of what you're using it for. In some cases, like walk and stalk hunting, where, you know, as long as you've got a pretty decent cheek weld and you've got something to hold on to in front and a good grip, the stock is a little bit less important. And then there's some disciplines like PRS where if you don't have a decent chassis or stock that's flat and well balanced and has the adjustment, you're just going to really struggle to compete at that high level. So let's run through these. Walk and stalk hunting, you want something that's lightweight, and you want something that can attach a sling to for ease of carrying, and preferably something that's not that sharp and uncomfortable to carry. So this chassis, for example, probably not the best fit for walk and stalk hunting. It's going to be a little bit heavy, it's going to be awkward. You can fit sling studs to it, but it's overkill. A lightweight synthetic stock or wooden stock is going to be perfectly fine. Stationary slash long range hunting, I've said the main thing is it needs to be comfortable and balanced. You want to be able to mount on a bar pod or tripod. So if you have a Picatinny rail in the front, on the bottom, that's great. If you have an Arca rail like this, even better. This DRS would actually make a great long range hunting rig, because it gives you something to clamp into. However, the comfort and balance is quite important. And as I said, you can get away with a bullpup like this if you really need to, but you might want to make some modifications to it just to be able to put a really solid bar pod on it over here, or to mount it in some sort of tripod Arca rail, or just to balance it out better with maybe a heavier cylinder in front to make it better suited for that style of shooting. And then sports slash competition, bench rest shooting. The main thing is you want something that is heavy and rigid and that can clamp into a front rest or can fit a bar pod. A lot of the bench rest rifles like this, you'll see, okay, this one I put a I put a pick rail in front here so that I could use it off a bipod, but this flat fore end over here is actually made to be clamped into a front rest, and then you've got this flat bag rider here that's made to be put on a rear bag. So this would be considered like a really nice bench rest slash long range target shooting stock, nice and heavy, whereas I don't want that to fall there. Whereas this one probably would not be suited at all to bench rest slash long range target shooting disciplines. For precision rifle, your chassis slash stock is probably one of the most important considerations, more than most other things on this list. And the reason being, once again, is that it has to be able to mount a bipod, otherwise you're in trouble. It has to be able to be balanced and to be able to sit nicely on a bag. So if you can't attach weights to it, or if it's not balanced straight away, you're gonna have problems. You're not gonna be able to balance the rifle. You're gonna really struggle. It has to, or preferably has to have a vertical grip, because that vertical grip really helps when kind of sitting in a position like this, to just kind of rest your hand here in a more natural position. This one's even got the thumb shelf. And then lastly, it has to be adjustable to your body. So adjustable cheek piece, adjustable length of pull, that stuff is really important for precision rifle shooting. Remember, you're not shooting off a very solid position very often. You're often shooting off very wobbly props. So that ability to lock on target and balance and sort of squeeze off the trigger slowly without having extreme amounts of wobble is really important. Magazine and magazine capacity. I've said that magazines for most disciplines, I mean, it's not non-negotiable, but everyone is making magazines for most PCP airguns today. So just get a gun that has a magazine. You're going to not regret it by doing that. There's maybe a few exceptions, like if you're shooting 25 meter bench rest, a lot of those guys, this style of shooting is a little bit slower and you can get away with single loading, but for most things you're definitely going to need a magazine. So for walk and stalk, I've said yes, but capacity is not critical. Once again, you may not be shooting hundreds of animals in a day, you might be shooting 2 to 5 animals in a day. A lot of my walk and stalk shooting for stuff like monkeys and ground squirrels, you're looking at maybe like 5 animals per day, so I often don't even need to change my magazine, so small capacity is totally fine. Stationary slash long range shooting, yes, you want a magazine. Once again, capacity is not that critical, but I would say you can get away with a bigger magazine for long range shooting because you don't have to consider the size of the magazine. For walk and stalk, you might want something that's a bit smaller. Bench rest shooting, large capacity recommended for most styles of bench rest shooting. The reason I say that is if you need to send a lot of shots down range in a good wind condition, single loading is going to slow you down. So having a good magazine capacity where you don't have to load it regularly is a benefit. And then precision rifle, magazine is definitely non-negotiable. You do not want to be single loading under a 2-minute time pressure for 10 shots, but you don't need a big capacity. 15 shots is totally fine. Sometimes for some stages I only load like 10 or 12 because that's all you need. So yep, you need a magazine that's reliable, but you don't need a large capacity magazine. Power requirements. This is an interesting discussion because every country is a little bit different, and that is probably why you see such a variety of air guns comparing, let's say, the typical European air gun where there's more power restrictions, and then the typical American air gun where there's no power restrictions. The guns differ so much, and a lot of that's due to the restrictions that are placed on muzzle energy. It also depends on what quarry you're hunting. If you're trying to shoot a bear with an air rifle, you're going to want a big, like 45 cal, 50 cal air gun shooting a very heavy slug at very high power. If you're shooting a rabbit, you can get away with a sub 12 foot-pound air rifle. The golden rule here is more power equals fewer shots. So sometimes it's actually a good thing to tune down your power to get more shots within a given air capacity. If let's say you want to specifically carry a more traditional rifle with a cylinder, you might want to turn your power down. And other way around, if you really need more power, like in the case of my long range shooting, long range hunting, where I need more power, it's always nice to have a bottle gun that can carry more shots per fill. So yeah, walk and stalk. I would say you probably don't need more shots, but more is better. So prioritize getting the configuration of your gun right. And if you really have to have more shots, you can always carry like a backpack with a small 3-liter tank. I've got a Scandinavian Airguns backpack tank, which is amazing and really helps with this walk and stalk hunting stuff. And then stationary long range, once again, depends on your environment and what you're shooting, but more is generally better. You want to shoot slugs if you're shooting long range. Pellets are, I'll say it again, I've given up on pellets long ago for long range shooting. They just are so aerodynamically inefficient that the wind takes them very easily. They lose velocity quickly. They're a terrible choice for long range hunting where you need to dump energy precisely at distance. And if you're shooting slugs, slugs are thirsty. They need a lot of air per shot. And you're going to want something that is able to put a lot of power downrange. Like the Impact, actually like all of these guns, yeah, they all do that. I don't play around that much anymore with low power air guns. Bench rest, okay, this is where rules come into play. In the USA, you're only allowed to shoot pellets, and a 30 cal and a 25 cal is a very forgiving caliber. So generally people are shooting 25 or 30 cal, and because you're only shooting pellets, they lose a lot of precision over sort of 900 to 950 plus feet per second. So there's very much a power limitation there to what actually works. High power guns are not really necessary, whereas the WRABF, the World Rimfire and Air Rifle Bench Race Federation Unlimited class bench race shooting, which is becoming very popular. You shoot at 100 meters, you're shooting slugs a lot of the time. You need more power to get a heavy, high ballistic coefficient slug downrange with power. So, as I said, this gun, which is kind of purpose built for that, is shooting like 115 foot-pounds. This is a gun that's so purpose built that I probably wouldn't use it for anything else, but that's what it's good at. Once again, for all the bench race disciplines though, precision is more important than power. So you're not pushing power just for the sake of getting more power. It's not hunting where you need that specific energy downrange, but often power equals precision when you're talking about wind conditions and trying to beat those wind conditions by using a projectile with a higher ballistic coefficient. Moving on to precision rifle, you want the highest possible power for the air capacity you have. Better ballistics give you a distinct advantage. So with the FX DRS Pro here, it is actually capable of shooting a 40 grain slug, which has a better BC, but I've actually tuned it to shoot a 36 grain slug. And the reason I've done that is that I'm trying to not push it too hard. Remember, precision is more important than power. But secondly, that's about the max weight I can shoot in this gun that will give me a safe sort of 15 shots per fill with this cylinder on it. If I shoot a 40 grain slug, it's pushing the limit a bit of the number of shots I can get per fill. So that's something you have to consider, but the highest power possible for your air capacity is the one you want to go with when shooting precision rifle disciplines to compete against the rimfires. Okay, I think we're getting somewhere. The last category here is durability. How finicky can the gun be? Is it something that, you tap it with your knuckle and an O-ring blows, or is it something that is a little bit more indestructible? These things are important. Walk and stalk hunting, I'd say durability is very important. Reason being is that the gun is more than likely going to get knocked about. If you are climbing through thick bush and there's branches slapping against the barrel, and you're climbing over fence posts and leaning the gun against the fence, it's getting scratched up, it's falling over, it's getting mud in it. It has to be reliable, and it has to not have constant point of impact shifts due to being knocked. So that's something that's very important to consider. Stationary / long range shooting, I would say that this is quite important, maybe not quite as important as walk and stalk, because you're not moving around and bumping it as much. You're generally in one position and set up in a stationary spot, but it's quite important because you still need to get to that spot, and if something does go wrong, you're generally far away from your tools or from a workshop where you can actually fix the problem. Bench rest, it's not that important to have a durable gun. It's sitting on a bench, you're taking it out of a nice thick foam padded carry case, putting it on a bench, and then you're shooting a bunch of sighter targets to make sure that there's been no shift before you actually move on to your scoring targets. So it's not important. If there's a point of impact shift, your barrel's got knocked about, you just re-zero it on your sighter target and you're good to go. Precision rifle, it's very, very, very important. This is the most difficult discipline to avoid your gun being bumped about, and it's also the discipline where you don't have opportunities to just zero your gun quickly before a stage. If it's shifted point of impact, or if something has gone wrong, they're not going to wait for you to fix your gun before you have to start the next stage. You're going to just lose out on points. So reliability is extremely important. And so far, because the DRS is actually a pretty simple gun compared to a lot of the stuff I shot these competitions with earlier, I've had zero issues with it. It hasn't leaked. There's not a lot of moving parts. There's not a lot that can go wrong. I trust it, and there's been 0 point of impact shifts. In fact, I think I shot a perfect score the last NRL 22 match I shot. I think I was the only person in the country to do that. So yeah, even comparing it to the rimfire, this thing has done its job, and I'm very, very, very happy with how it's held up to all the abuse. And hey, that's it. That's all our discussion points. But we have to recommend some guns. Now, just something very important for me to say here, I am not going to recommend anything that I haven't shot myself. There's a lot of people shooting different guns that seem to have done very well, but it's very hard to gauge with how much custom work has been put into those guns, for example, or how much work the manufacturer has put into that gun for a sponsored shooter, or whether the parts are not even standard. So I'm going to stick to the guns that I've used for all these things, and I'm going to compare them as standard guns. So I'm not going to talk about custom rifles for each of these. Starting with Walk and Stalk, I know a lot of people are on a budget, so I'm going to go ahead and say the Air Venturi Avenger and Nova Vista Leviathan, which are essentially the same gun, is a great budget choice. They actually shoot lightweight slugs very well. They're not super high end with amazing triggers and really nice stocks and all that, but they're going to get the job done, and value for money is quite good. So I would say that's a good choice. And then if you have a higher budget, I'd say an FX DRS Classic is a great walk and stalk gun. It's very light, it's very simple, so there's not a lot that can go wrong, and the form factor is amazing for carrying around. And obviously FX, proven accuracy and proven trigger break, all that stuff, it's all there. So DRS Classic's perfect for that. And then the FX Crown, 500 or 600 millimeter barrel. If you need a slightly higher air capacity, that's a fantastic gun. You've got a bottle on the front. And then the FX Impact, 500/600/700 millimeter for walk and stalk, nice and short in that bullpup form. And yeah, it's got, once again, proven track record, extremely accurate, and it has the power if you need to shoot further also. Moving on to long range shooting. I've taken the Nova Vista and Air Venturi out of the equation just because they don't quite have the power or precision to really smack stuff at like 100 meters plus consistently. I mean, you might be able to get lucky, and if there's no wind, you'll do just fine with lightweight slugs, don't get me wrong, but we're talking like the ability to really hit stuff at distance. FX DRS Pro, this guy over here, it's a precision rifle gun, but lock this in a tripod and you're gonna hit anything at any distance with it. It's that good. FX Panthera, once again, I've had a lot of experience with this, shooting dussies off the cliff sides and stuff like that. It's a fantastic long range gun. It's going to do the business. And then I've said FX Impact 700/800. So this, but with a longer barrel. And the reason that's on the list is because of that long barrel, long runway, and big air capacity. You can really push the limits of power without having to worry so much about shot count and length. So that's a great choice. Okay, my recommendations for bench rest. Now, keep in mind my experience here is mostly limited to 100-yard bench rest in the US and 100-meter unlimited class bench rest. But I've also shot a couple 25-meter competitions and have tried a few 25-meter guns, so I know what does work well. So firstly, for 100-yard shooting, the only guns I've shot with for 100-yard bench rest are the FX Impact and FX Crown, but they have performed extremely well for me and for many other people. So I'm going to say that that's a really solid option for 100-yard bench rest shooting pellets. For 25-meter bench rest, which is lower power and generally speaking 177, there's 3 guns that have really stood out, and that's Thomas, who really make really high-end bench rest guns, Raw, who make really solid, simple bench rest guns with thick stocks. 25-meter, the Raws have proven themselves, and Steyr. Steyr LG110, it's got a really good track record, and it's a good option for 25-meter. You can also use, like, if you're shooting unlimited class, like with no power restrictions for 25-meter, you can shoot like a Panthera or an Impact or a Crown or whatever, but generally speaking, those guns are better suited to higher power shooting with the bigger calibers. And then WRABF unlimited class 100-meter shooting, the Panthera is a great option. You've got that that full adapter right at the back, so it's easy to tether to a tank. You're allowed to tether for that discipline, and also it's in a rifle form, so you can mount your bipod further forward, and you can get nicely on a bag at the back, and that's a fantastic gun. It's got the power, and for 100-meter shooting, you're going to be able to dump proper power downrange. And I'll add, I mean, the main reason this isn't on the list is because this brand, I think they're no longer making these air guns, but also it's very niche, and not many people can afford this and will afford it just for bench rest shooting. But this is a great unlimited class bench rest gun. You tether it, you put an external regulator on it, and you have to single load it. That's also one of the weaknesses of this gun, but it's really beautiful, and it holds zero really well because it's got this thick floating barrel and a really nice trigger. This is a Remington 700 action, so you can pop any Remington 700 trigger in here. I've got a Bixen Andy trigger on here right now, so probably the best trigger I've ever felt on an air rifle. And then the parts inside are actually titanium, and they're on bearings. So the hammer and spring are actually on bearings, and they're very, very smooth. It's a bit violent as far as the actual hammer weight and everything goes to get that power, but it's a great option, just not really something that's available to most people. And then lastly, precision rifle. Honestly, there's probably only 2 choices here when it comes to really being able to compete at the highest level, and I say that because there's only been 2 guns that have really done well in this discipline and are custom built for this discipline, and that's the DRS Pro and the FX Pantera. But the only thing with the Pantera is to balance it, you do need to change out the factory forend with something like the Air Marksman or Saber Tactical forend, which has more weight and is a bit longer and a bit more rigid. Once you do that, the Pantera is very capable. But as far as a standard production gun goes, the DRS Pro, it's the king right now. Nothing is going to dethrone this for quite a while. It's extremely capable. It won me RMAC PRS. Got a lot of the top 10 places in RMAC PRS, and yeah, it's doing really well for me at local competitions also. So this is it's an expensive gun, but if you're very serious about precision rifle, this is probably your only choice. Aside from that, you can probably get away with shooting like as a practice gun, or just if you don't really care about getting super high score, you just want to get proficient in it, like a FX Dreamline or any sort of traditional rifle that can balance on a bag fairly well is going to be fine for that. But yeah, this is just on a different league. I just want to say something quickly about budgets. There are exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, you get what you pay for. So something like a DRS Pro, you might say that's really overpriced, but if you are trying to compete at that highest level, there isn't much room for compromise. You kind of have to just say, okay, I actually need the best of everything, even if it costs, because you're competing against guys shooting rimfires, which are able to achieve the power and precision a little bit easier than an airgun is, with fewer parts, So you kind of have to go all out. But if you're just hunting in your backyard, for example, or going to shoot pigeons in a shed, then you can very much get away with a more entry-level gun. But just keep that in mind, you get what you pay for, and it really depends on how serious you are about the whole airgun thing when you're looking at budgeting for this stuff. In closing, I really hope this has helped you to make a decision on an airgun that is right for you. I know that I've missed a lot of brands when doing these recommendations, but the reality is I don't have bottomless pockets to go out and buy every airgun I've ever heard of and actually get experience with it. And I'm very reluctant to go on sort of hearsay advice on what works well and what doesn't. I like to try stuff myself and then advise stuff to people. And I will say though that everything on my list is stuff I have full confidence in. I've used at the very highest level, whether it's competitions all over the world or hunting over here in very tough windy conditions and getting the job done. So you can trust me on the brands that I have spoken about and the specific products I have spoken about, and I do kind of know what I'm talking about. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider subscribing. It really helps. Give it a thumbs up if you feel like it's helped you, and stick around because there's still a lot more hunting coming on this channel. I've got a lot of stuff that I've been working on, and hopefully I'll be able to put that up soon. I'll see you then.